Hello and welcome to Cloud 101, an introduction to cloud computing. My name is Ryan Little. I'm a technical program manager for the AWS Educate EMEA team. And I'll be delivering this session to all of you today. You'll notice that your microphones have been set to mute, but you have the ability to post questions in the chat. And I encourage you to leave as many questions as you wish. And I'll leave some time at the end of the presentation to go over these. This session will also be made available for on-demand consumption in the coming days. Also, be sure to check out our workshop from Home Series website, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a little bit. Now, this session is really geared to anyone who's naturally curious about cloud and cloud computing and what that means in this place and space that we're in. This is also brought out from a series of workshops that we are delivering now for students and educators. So I'll be framing many of the concepts that I talk about today through the eyes of different students and educators in the AWS Educate portal. And for those unfamiliar, AWS Educate is used in more than 200 countries and territories. It connects 2,400 institutions, over 10,000 educators, and hundreds of thousands of students around the world. And through AWS Educate, students and educators have access to content and programs developed to skill up for cloud careers in growing fields like data science and cybersecurity. AWS Educate also connects many companies hiring for cloud skills to qualified student job seekers with the AWS Educate job board. So I did mention the AWS workshops from Home series, which we at AWS Educate have recently launched in light of COVID-19 around the world, and hopefully providing an avenue for students and educators to go to really get upskilled in cloud in general, and also to learn more specifically about AWS Cloud and the service categories therein. Some of the topics that are covered are really introduction sessions to AWS. We talk quite a bit about networking. We also talk about machine learning and that space as well. So make sure you check out many of the workshops that we currently have running. Many of them are on demand, so you can go back and consume anytime. Or you can partake of a live session like this one that will allow you to kind of have a little bit more engagement in the session as far as Q&A and things like that. Speaking of which, make sure you get your questions in now. I'll be sure to cover as many as I can before the end of the session, and if not, we can take it offline and try to follow up with you. Or I encourage you to visit our AWS public page for any information on the topics that we talk about today. So let's first go over some of the goals for today. First, we're going to define the term cloud, and then kind of more specifically look at the AWS cloud and talk about some of the benefits of a cloud environment. We talk about the 6 main benefits. We'll highlight those. We'll also look at comparisons between the term cloud, on-premises, and even a hybrid model and what that means. We'll also cover cloud computing terms such as infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Then we're going to take a look at some of the, we'll take a brief look at the AWS ecosystem, that is the service categories, and look at some of our core services like compute, network, storage, database, all the way up to maybe more cutting edge services and service categories like machine learning and robotics. We will describe the AWS physical infrastructure and define terms like region, availability zone, and edge location. We'll also talk about AWS security. And it's very important really in dealing with any cloud environment, but from an AWS perspective, understanding what security means in the cloud and of the cloud. And we'll talk about the differences between the two. We'll also highlight some of the millions of customers already using AWS. For many folks listening today coming from some sort of educational institution background or public sector, so we'll try to highlight some of those customers as an example. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a high-level overview of the AWS Educate environment and really how to get started. So let's first start by asking the question, really, what is the AWS cloud? But I would argue and probably say, what is cloud in general? So I think it's important to start there and get a level set of what we're talking about. So what is cloud? In a traditional on-premises IT environment, typically all the physical components required to run business systems were owned, operated, and maintained and housed by the company. So a user would connect and log on to the corporate network to access resources. And this would include things like corporate applications, file sharing, and storage. And then the cloud came along, and from an AWS perspective, starting back in 2006. But in general, the cloud provides access to the same or similar resources through the internet, and it's hosted by a cloud services platform. So the term cloud here comes from a time when internet resources or connectivity were often represented by a cloud in diagrams much like this that illustrated connectivity and data flow. So very important to understand. We'll talk about some of the differences here, but having resources on-prem and having resources in the cloud, and maybe even having both of these simultaneously. Many of our customers operating in this kind of hybrid environment. Cloud computing provides a simple way to access servers, storage, databases, and a broad set of application services over the internet. AWS owns and maintains the network-connected hardware, and effectively you provision and use what you need. So you can think of cloud computing and AWS cloud very much like a utility, like a light switch, for example. You walk into an area, you turn on a switch, you leverage that light switch for as long as you need, and then when you leave, you turn it off and you're done. You're going to use effectively an analogous type of model for cloud environments, and you'll come to get to know a term that I'm starting to hear more and more these days, which is cloud hygiene. So the degree to which that you maintain the cloud health of your environment, leveraging what we call the well-architected framework, and there's a number of pillars that go along with that. So effectively looking at the viability and the health of your cloud environments and using good cloud hygiene. And of course, AWS offers a broad set of global cloud-based products that we mentioned in compute and storage and other areas, but also even venturing into mobile developer tools, management tools, IoT, AI and ML, and even augmented reality, virtual reality as well. So there's a whole host of products and services available for educators and students to leverage. We have over 175 services in the ecosystem. Most of them are available for you in the AWS Educate portal, so definitely take advantage of those resources as you move forward. Now we're going to take a look at some cloud computing models. So oftentimes in this kind of IT world and actually in the ecosystem that we live in, we talk about many of these cloud computing models. This terminology more or less kind of lives in the ecosystem, but we don't use these terms as much at AWS. But you'll see that there are services that align to each of these within the AWS ecosystem. So starting first with that first cloud computing model, which you may have heard, which is infrastructure as a service, or IaaS. This really contains the basic building blocks for cloud IT, and typically provide access to things like networking features, your computers, whether they're virtual or dedicated hardware, your data storage space, etc. And infrastructure as a service here really provides you with the highest level of flexibility and management control over your IT resources, and is most similar to existing IT resources that many IT departments and developers are already familiar with today. So you can think of things like running your virtualized compute on-prem very much in the same fashion in an IaaS model. The next is platform as a service, or often referred to as PaaS. Platform as a service removes the need for organizations to manage that underlying infrastructure. Usually, here talking about the hardware or the operating systems, and allows you to focus on the deployment and management of your applications. So this really helps you be more efficient, as you don't need to worry about all the kind of resource procurement, capacity planning, software maintenance, and patching, or any of the other what we call undifferentiated heavy lifting involved in running your application. So a good example from an AWS perspective might be a managed database. We have a service that operates in that space and has added benefits from I guess you could call it from a platform perspective, because it provides things like automatic backups and patching capability. We also have a service that's really out of the box and easy to use for deploying and scaling web applications and services, no matter if it's developed in Java or .NET, PHP, maybe Docker. That can get, I often talk about getting customers up and running quickly in the cloud, and leveraging these types of services helps you to do that. And then finally, we have this term software as a service, or SaaS. SaaS really offers you a complete product that is run and managed by the service provider. In most cases, people referring to SaaS are referring to kind of end user applications. With a SaaS offering, you don't have to think about how the service is maintained or how the underlying infrastructure is managed. You only need to think about how you'll use that particular piece of software. So a really common example of a SaaS application is things like web-based email, which allows you to send and receive email without having to manage the servers or the operating system the email runs on. And you don't have to patch the mail servers or handle feature additions to it. Now, we do have a service on AWS Cloud called AWS Marketplace that offers 39 categories, more than 7,000 listings for things like infrastructure software like backup and recovery, security, and data analytics, all the way down to things like machine learning with computer vision and natural language processing. We currently have about 1,500 independent software vendors, or ISVs, that kind of live and operate in that space, and about 260,000 active customers who are using software for AWS Marketplace. So these are the three cloud computing kind of terms and models that you may hear kind of in a general cloud space: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And again, AWS having offerings in each of these areas. You'll also come to hear and come to know different cloud deployment models like on-premises, hybrid, and cloud. And we've kind of generally already covered on-premises and cloud, more or less. This third term, hybrid, is very interesting. So hybrid deployment really connects infrastructure and applications between cloud-based resources and on-premises resources. And organizations use this really to extend their infrastructure into the cloud while connecting cloud resources to internal systems. So really what that means is we have many of our millions of customers, actually even today, that are, a vast majority of them are operating in this on-premises world, but linking up to or connecting to a cloud model via a number of networking services that we have available, migration services, things like that, which really entails both environments, on-prem and cloud, being used live in production. And so this is what we refer to as kind of the hybrid model. And so it's kind of a misnomer to think that all of our customers are all in, as it were, on cloud, although we do have many of those, typically startups in the cloud space. But actually, in point of fact, most of our customers are in a hybrid model. So what are the benefits of the AWS cloud? We're going to talk about 6 of these benefits. The first benefit is this idea of being able to trade capital expense for variable expense. So you can think of this as, instead of investing heavily in data centers and going through things like purchasing expense, the running costs, the procurement, the racking and stacking, and the equipment that's involved with that, and the servers, before you know how you're going to use them. And that's typically many traditional companies and models have leveraged, including Amazon for many years. So they're having to, pre-provision for 1, 3, or even 5 years in advance, and having to kind of guesstimate what their consumption would be. Rather than this other model, this cloud-based model, which is kind of paying for only what you use and consuming the services as and when you need to. Okay, so you'll also hear a term called cloud hygiene, or being cloud hygienic, right? So being really good at turning on and turning off services quickly, maybe even automating some of those services a little bit. More as you evolve in the cloud space. Automation actually becomes, for if you look at more kind of our more experienced customers in the cloud, highly leveraging automated environments and alarms, and having the system, i.e., AWS and or your applications, giving you updates to how the health of your system is doing. Right, and so that becomes a very interesting place and space to be, rather than you proactively having to go and search for things that are wrong, or being able to kind of manually observe your environment. Although of course you can do that, you tend to see many of the more experienced customers in cloud leveraging automation. Another kind of added benefit of cloud is this idea of massive economies of scale. And so what this means is, by using cloud computing, you achieve a lower variable cost than you can get on your own. And because usage from hundreds of thousands of customers is really aggregated in the cloud, providers such like AWS can achieve higher economies of scale, which really translates into lower pay-as-you-go prices. So really what that means is, as you leverage cloud and leverage a lot of the resources, AWS builds out more infrastructure, but we also try to pass those savings on to you as a customer. So a good example of that is we've lowered our prices 80 times since 2006, largely in the areas of compute, so making it more affordable for our customers globally. So as a customer of AWS, you start to leverage these kind of massive economies of scale. A next really kind of tangible benefit is this idea of getting out of the very traditional model of kind of guesstimating your capacity, which we talked about. And usually most organizations will overestimate server capacity, so they have the resource to fill customer demand, but oftentimes they're sitting on what we call idle resource. And this can be very, very costly, very, very expensive. The inverse of that is having not enough capacity, or underestimating server capacity. So, you can think of maybe running an ad campaign for a beverage company, or running an ad for a movie, and you just don't have the physical infrastructure to handle the customer demand that's needed for that time. And so really what that translates into is that customers have a poor experience. They're not able to access your website, and actually starts to affect your branding as an organization. So that becomes really critical, particularly these days when folks are not willing to wait even seconds for a website to load if it's not being able to render. So very, very critical to be in a business of moving capacity and scale, what we call scaling capacity based on demand. And that's what you see on the right side of your screen. The blue line there representing the customer demand, and kind of the orange line is the infrastructure capacity. So you can think of the compute that's needed. And you'll see that there's kind of peaks and valleys in that. And at peak times, you can think of things like Prime Day or Black Friday or Cyber Monday, Christmas, where there's going to be high demand for your customers or for your students maybe that are accessing classes, and they're looking to sign up to classes online. And then outside of the school time, outside of those seasons, you'll see those kind of those peaks start to fall, and consumption lowers, and your infrastructure can be provisioned as such that it doesn't incur additional costs. There's things like auto scaling that you can run, or even kind of automating those environments. So that becomes really, really a critical factor, particularly for kind of high peak or seasonal events. This is another big one for many customers, is this idea of speed and agility. So in a cloud computing environment, new IT resources are really only ever a click away here versus the traditional model, which is typically weeks and months having to wait just to put in an order for your compute resource. So putting an order in for those servers, racking and stacking on them, and kind of provisioning them often takes weeks and months versus really down to minutes, maybe even seconds, depending on the resources that you're looking to leverage. So vastly different. It also means from a innovation perspective, you're able to build, test, and sometimes fail. And I use this word quite a bit in my conversations with customers and partners. When you're in a cloud model, a cloud space model, it's actually, you can make it as such to be very cost effective in order to test something to see if it works, try it, and if it doesn't, you can throw it away and pay either very little or sometimes no cost if you're on the free tier for that particular effort. If it does work, then you can what we call double down on that and build and iterate on that process very quickly. So you see many customers, if you look at the early startups that joined AWS, like companies like Airbnb, they were able to leapfrog over the traditional hotel industry because they were able to move very quickly with their business model and scale globally. That becomes a huge differentiator for many companies. Also is this idea of, again, getting out of, you'll hear this term, the undifferentiated heavy lifting. You also hear a term called technical debt. That's the business of maintaining and operating your physical infrastructure. And whilst we still have customers that operate in that space, as I said, in the hybrid model, they're starting to explore more kind of cloud-centric models where it doesn't really define or differentiate their business as much in terms of the heavy lifting, the racking, the stacking, and the powering. That can be scaled and done globally now through many different cloud providers that can do that at huge economies of scale. We talked about scaling globally, so a little bit later I'll show you what that looks like from an AWS perspective. But being able to scale and go what we call go global in minutes becomes a huge differentiator as well. So being able to easily deploy your application in what we call multiple regions around the world with just a few clicks. So this means that you can provide a lower latency and a better experience for you and your customers simply and at minimal cost. So we'll cover those terms I talked about earlier, AWS regions and availability zones, in a little bit more depth a little bit later. And then, of course, we can't really talk about cloud space without talking about security. And from an AWS perspective, this is mission critical, right? And so we have many of our customers around the world that are relying on us for any one of the services that we've talked about, either from an infrastructure, platform, or software as a service level. So we have to make sure that our resources are able to keep your data safe, and that's via the compliance requirements that we have to go through as an organization. Most companies have to go through an infrastructure compliance as well as a data compliance process. The heavy lifting for compliance is done largely from an infrastructure perspective with AWS. So customers don't have to worry from an infrastructure perspective on things like PCI DSS or HIPAA in the States, GDPR here in Europe, and other security and compliance attestations. Customers still need to consider their data because customers are responsible for their data. So making sure that their data, not the infrastructure, but their data is compliant. That's a very important piece in the security kind of puzzle. But actually, AWS offers around 230 security, compliance, and governance services in key features, which helps and aids in things like encryption. And we have about 117 different AWS services that offer encryption with them. So loads of opportunities to layer security in breadth and at depth with AWS. Also, being able to save money, which is also a driver too. We have many of our customers that are leveraging. We have kind of a unique pricing model for compute, something called spot instances, which can help customers save up to 90% on things like their Windows compute costs and licensing costs if they're leveraging our dedicated hosts as well. So significant savings in those spaces to explore. And then finally, being able to scale quickly. So, security scales with your AWS cloud usage. So no matter the size of your business, the AWS infrastructure is designed to keep your data safe, reducing the risk as you scale by using our security automation and things like activity monitoring to detect suspicious security events, maybe like configuration changes to your environment or across your ecosystem. And you can integrate our services with your existing solutions to support existing workflows, streamlining your operations, and simplifying compliance reporting. So again, this is where this idea of automation comes into play very much in this place and space. So we'll talk about ways in which you can keep your data safe a little bit more concretely a bit later. So the AWS service categories, as I mentioned, AWS offers a broad set of global cloud-based services on demand, available in seconds with that pay-as-you-go pricing. Some examples of this, and this is just a sampling of the service categories that we have. So taking one of them, like compute, for instance, you'll have an option for things like virtual server hosting or container management, even serverless computing. In this space, you actually can leverage milliseconds of compute to run some sort of event for you or your application. We could look at storage, and we have a reliable, scalable, and secure place for things like data storage. One of our object storage services, has about 11 nines of durability associated to that. So, and that durability speaks to the integrity of an object over time. So huge benefits there. Networking and content delivery, looking at our content delivery network, our virtual private cloud, our direct connections, load balancing, and DNS offering also available. Many purpose-built databases for your application needs. We have relational database, non-relational. We have graph database. We're even into areas of kind of blockchain environments as well. So all sorts of capabilities. And then particularly for educators, things like end user computing, provisioning virtual cloud-based Microsoft Windows desktops, for example, for your students. And we get a lot of questions around machine learning for our customers, and particularly for educators and students. And the goal and the aim of machine learning from an AWS perspective is to put machine learning in the hands of every developer and data scientist. And I would even argue you don't have to be a developer or a data scientist to understand machine learning on top of AWS. We want to make it as smooth and as seamless as possible for really anyone can do that. And we have a service a number of services that help with like building, testing, and deploying machine learning models. Even robotics, we're able to develop, test, and deploy intelligent robotics applications at scale. So a huge benefit that many of our customers can leverage, even extending into augmented reality, virtual reality in this space. So stay tuned. We might even be running a few sessions related to what we call AR/VR, augmented reality, virtual reality. Okay, so you might have seen this report. This is actually referencing Gartner Magic Quadrant for Cloud Infrastructure as a Service. This is a yearly report, analyst report that comes out. This was as of July of last year. And it looks at these kind of four quadrants that you see for a cloud service provider for cloud infrastructure as a service. And you'll notice there's kind of two key metrics and axes that they look at to leverage a cloud service provider. On the x-axis is this idea of completeness of vision. So where a cloud provider started, where they are now, and what's their future vision, their future kind of goal and aspiration. So you can think, are they breaking ground in new areas like provable security and quantum computing, for example? Are they innovating for their customers and coming out with new services? How do they innovate in this space? And the second on the second axis there is the ability to execute. So what are their pricing models like? What is their service feature service feature and depth, and also customer satisfaction ratings? So if you're indexing high on completeness of vision, so future growth, and also offering a broad range of services at convenient prices, and customers are happy and satisfied, typically you'll see cloud services providers living in the leader quadrant, which is in the top right corner. And you'll see kind of where AWS sits in that place in space. And when I look at this, and I encourage all of you, if you're curious about not just AWS but other cloud providers, to read this report. It actually goes into a lot of detail. It gives independent and objective analysis of each of the providers listed. It talks about strengths and challenges and everything that are available for each of them as well. But when I look at this and I see AWS and where it sits, I see that it's been in the business for the last 14 years. I see that we've built, test, and even, as I talked about, failure, even sometimes failed in environments to grow. And a good example is that was the Fire Phone. And not being as successful in the mobile space, but learning from those failures becomes really important, and translating those failures into other services like Alexa become hugely critical. From an AWS perspective, we also talk about our pace of innovation. So building out, I think it was last year, was over 1,900 new services and features of a service over the course of the year. So that's about 5 services and or feature updates a day. We're able to do that through things like our what we call our 2 pizza teams. So these are small teams, well, a team big enough to feed 2 pizzas, that are able to iterate very quickly. So a good example of that is if you kind of buy something on Amazon, a little bit, when you scroll down the page, you'll see, you bought this item, you're most likely to like these other items. So there's actually a machine learning algorithm and a machine learning team, a 2 pizza team, that iterates on that aspect of the application all day, every day. And that's their kind of form and function as a group. So that's another, I think, key differentiator here. It's what allows AWS to, have a $10 billion run rate have a revenue of $10 billion in Q4. So we're up 34% year over year, and we're nearly a $40 billion run rate business. So huge innovation in that space. Okay, now we're going to transition and talk a little bit about AWS global infrastructure, and we'll cover those terms like region, availability zone, and edge location. So, as I mentioned, AWS serves over 1 million active customers in more than 190 countries. We're steadily expanding our global infrastructure to help our customers achieve lower latency and higher throughput, and to ensure that their data resides only in the AWS regions that they specify. And as our customers grow their businesses, AWS will continue to provide infrastructure that meets their global requirements. And for the AWS cloud infrastructure, this is built around what we call AWS regions and availability zones. An AWS region is a physical location in the world where we have multiple what we call availability zones. So you can think of a region as a place, so you'll hear a term usually from a city, state, or country name like London, Ohio, or Singapore. And then within a region, you'll have effectively clusters of data centers in physically distinct buildings. So that would be an example of an availability zone. And each region is designed to be completely isolated from the other regions to achieve the greatest possible fault tolerance and stability. And when you view your resources, you'll only see the resources that are tied to the region that you've specified. Again, speaking to that regional isolation that's available. AWS does not replicate resources across regions automatically. There's capability to do that, but that has to be user-generated, user-initiated. Currently, the AWS global infrastructure is comprised of over 69 availability zones within 22 geographic regions. with announced plans for 16 more availability zones in 5 more regions across Indonesia, Italy, Japan, South Africa, and Spain. So stay tuned for those updates as and when they come in. We'll talk about also this term. So that we talked about region. There's also the term availability zone. So an availability zone within a region, and usually we'll have multiple availability zones or clusters of data centers within a given region. But if you were to zoom in on one availability zone, in this case, looking at the Singapore region, you'll see multiple, or at least 3 availability zones or clusters of data centers in that given region. So an availability zone consists of one or more discrete data centers in physically distinct buildings, each with its own redundant power, networking, and connectivity, and housed in separate facilities. And these availability zones offer you the ability to operate production applications and databases that are more highly available, fault tolerant, and scalable than would be possible from a single data center. And you'll also notice that there's that kind of orange line that goes throughout each of the availability zones. And that's a high throughput, low latency link that can connect those availability zones as and when you choose to build out across multiple availability zones. And that's generally the recommendation for having highly available systems and applications. Most of our customers leveraging, let's say, 2 availability zones for high availability, sometimes 3 depending on their workload. And sometimes we have customers leveraging multiple regions to be more highly available and fault tolerant. So it just depends on your level of comfort in that space. So in addition to regions, availability zones, we also have what are called points of presence, or POP. And these consist of edge locations and regional edge cache servers. So if you are looking to deliver content closer to your end users, so if you can think any static or dynamic content, or maybe there's a video that you want your customers in another part of the world to view, you can leverage these edge locations or POPs, points of presence, and move that content closer to them. So leveraging like things like our DNS service or CDN service also helps with that, and a number of other AWS-centric services that live out there on the edge. And these are outside of the regions and availability zones. Talk briefly about some of the factors that shape region selection, how and when you choose a region. From an AWS Educate perspective, and just kind of jumping out at a macro level quickly, many of you will have created accounts through AWS Educate already. If so, you're bound to one region, which is the US East 1. And that's where many of our students and educators are able to leverage AWS. So keep that in mind when you're in the Educate environments, and encourage your students to leverage US East 1 for building out solutions. If you have a full AWS production account, then you'll want to pay particular note to these factors that shape region selection, because there's a number of factors. We talk briefly about AWS security here. We'll highlight security of the cloud and security in the cloud. Cloud security at AWS is the highest priority. Customers benefit from a data center and a network architecture built to meet the requirements of the most security-sensitive organizations. Security in the cloud is much like security in your on-premises data centers, only without the costs of maintaining facilities and hardware. In the cloud, you don't have to manage physical servers or storage devices. Instead, you would use software-based security tools to monitor and protect the flow of information into and out of your cloud resources. And an advantage of the AWS cloud is that it allows you to scale and innovate while maintaining a secure environment and paying only for the services you use. So this means that you can have the security you need at a lower cost than in an on-premises environment. And as an AWS customer, you inherit all the best practices of the AWS policies, architecture, and operational processes built to satisfy the requirements of our most security-sensitive customers. And AWS Cloud enables what we call here a shared responsibility model. So while AWS manages security of the cloud, all of those bits in orange there, like the regions, availability zones, edge locations, you are responsible for security in the cloud. And all the bits at the top in the darker color. So think of things like encryption in transit and at rest, operating systems, firewall settings, access management, and all the other important pieces that are fit. Most important of which is the customer data, making sure that that's safe, secure, and compliant. And of course, AWS provides you with the guidance and expertise through online resources, personnel, and partners. AWS also provides you with advisories for current issues. Plus, you have the opportunity to work with AWS when you encounter security issues. You get access to hundreds of tools and features to help you meet your security objectives. And then AWS provides security-specific tools and features across network security, configuration, access control, and data encryption. And finally, AWS environments are continuously audited with certifications from accreditation bodies across geographies and verticals. And in the AWS environment, you can take advantage of many of these automated tools for asset inventory and privileged access reporting. Again, just highlighting the fact too that if you're leveraging AWS Educate portal, much of the security component is handled for you in that regard. And as far as the classroom environment, those have been scoped in such a way as to to cover much of the external threats as possible. Still incumbent upon you as a user, as a customer, making sure that you're locking down your firewall configurations and things like that whenever you're releasing data to the public, and keeping in mind access management controls. But for a great deal, particularly for the authentication piece, much of that is done for you vis-a-vis the classroom experience. So here we're going to highlight the three ways in which you can interface with the AWS environment. We'll highlight these three areas. The first is the first ways of interacting with AWS is through the AWS Management Console. The console provides a rich graphical interface to a majority of the features offered by AWS. If, as an educator, when you create a classroom, invite your students, this is typically what the first page they'll see when they log into the AWS homepage, as it were. They'll see this Management Console. Users can also explore the command line interface, or the AWS CLI. The CLI provides a suite of utilities that can be launched from a command program, so like Linux, Mac, or Windows. And then finally, users have our software development kits, or SDKs. And here AWS provides packages that enable accessing AWS in a large variety of popular programming languages. And this not only makes it easy to use AWS in your existing and here again is an example of an AWS Management Console, and you'll see the page there rendered either through your laptop or mobile device. Again, what many of your students will see when they log in through Educate Classrooms. We have the AWS CLI, again, open source tool built on top of the AWS SDK that provides commands for interacting with AWS services. So you could have Linux shells here, so using common shell programs such as Bash. You have Windows command line here on Microsoft Windows, so you can run commands in either PowerShell or the Windows command processor. And AWS manages infrastructure as code by using the AWS SDKs and the APIs that underlie them. So these are language-specific SDKs like JavaScript, Python, .NET, Node.js, and others that contain APIs that allow you to easily incorporate the wide range of AWS cloud services into your code without writing the functions yourself. I do want to take a moment and highlight AWS customers in this space. So we'll have a brief glimpse at many of the or some of the millions of customers in the AWS ecosystem currently. We'll take a look at enterprise, startup, and public sector. So at AWS, you can imagine every imaginable business segment is using AWS in a very meaningful way. So the cloud is such a strong value proposition for many customers that there really isn't a customer segment that won't get a lot of benefit from moving to the cloud. So in an enterprise space, you can think of companies like BMW that uses AWS to power the BMW connected drive, which integrates a car's intelligent interfaces, drivers, smartphones, and Alexa-enabled devices and other technologies. Also, the energy company Enel, which serves 64 million customers and is saving about 21% on compute costs and about 60% on storage costs, and has reduced provisioning time by 90%. So they're able to leverage IoT and other services on their platform for energy management. And then, of course, there's Novartis, a multinational pharmaceutical company who's saved millions of dollars by using AWS to build a platform that can conduct 39 years worth of computational chemistry in about 9 hours. So that's that speed and agility that I talked about earlier, which was a huge factor for kind of these larger companies moving to a cloud space. And they were able to do so with considerable cost savings. So they had done the analysis and figured out if they were looking to run a solution of 10 million compounds against a common cancer target, it normally would have cost them about $40 million in an on-premises environment versus about just over 4,000 in AWS. So a huge cost savings for them. It's a huge driver for them to consider cloud. And of course, in a startup space, you have companies like Deliveroo, Airbnb, Netflix, and Uber. Most startups today tend to gravitate towards a cloud environment. It just seems to be the de facto option for all the reasons that we highlighted for cost savings, speed, and agility. And then we also have finally public sector. So over 6,500 government agencies, 11,000 academic institutions, and over 29,000 nonprofit organizations around the world using AWS. Hundreds of millions of students, educators, and researchers in over 200 countries and territories have access to education technologies and online curriculum that are being run on top of AWS. So 19 of the top 20 most well-funded U.S. education technology startups are using AWS. So these are companies like Civitas Learning and Coursera, Echo360, and Schoolology. In point of fact, Coursera is moving to what we call a microservices-based architecture, which is really interesting. So they're actually having to go through their own digital transformation in adopting to cloud. And we have about 96% of the what are called R1 research institutions are using AWS. So these are institutions like Cornell University, Arizona State, and the University of Notre Dame. So a very broad selection of customers in different capacities using AWS. So in summary, just want to highlight some of the things that we've talked about today. We highlighted what cloud was. Effectively is the on-demand use of IT services via the internet with pay-as-you-go pricing. We talked about this could be in areas of compute and storage, database, and other resources. We highlighted the global infrastructure that AWS uses, the regions and availability zones, as well as the POPs, points of presence, which allow for more highly available, fault-tolerant, and scalable systems than traditional data infrastructure. And then we also highlighted the 3 different ways you can interface with the AWS environment via the management console, the CLI, and SDKs. Now, I do want to take a moment and just highlight and make sure that you get your questions in before the end of the session, and we'll have a chance to look at them. But I want to introduce you to AWS Educate, and this is really directed towards educators. So Of course, students can join the portal as well, but as an educator, this can provide multiple resources for you. Among the resources are access to the AWS console, where you can use your AWS promotional credits, curricular resources, and AWS classrooms. As and like effectively, classrooms here is going to be a complete lab environment that you and your students can use, as well as some professional development resources that are made available to you. AWS Classrooms provides a hands-on learning environment to students. Educators can request this environment for the length of their course, whether 3 months or 6 months, with preloaded credits so students can complete labs, projects, and assignments using real-world AWS services. Educators have visibility into the students' AWS environment so they can also monitor the students' activity and progress. So this becomes a kind of a force multiplier too in AWS Educate, because no longer, if you're leveraging classrooms, no longer are students or educators leveraging their starter account credits. These are the classroom experience and the classroom credits are separate from your starter account credits, and you can have multiple classrooms as an educator spun up to teach your courses effectively. So this can give students and yourselves more opportunities to build and test on the AWS ecosystem. We even have some educators that build classrooms for other educators if they want to test out a new idea or build an application that they want to experiment with. So this becomes a great learning tool for educators and students alike. And then as far as the content, as I mentioned, much of that is AWS produced, which includes videos, white papers, and tutorials. All of the content is free for you as educators to consume and leverage for your own classroom environments or for your own professional development. And this is the same content AWS provides to its customers and partners, so directly from industry in effect. We also have faculty developed content, which is course materials developed by AWS Educate faculty all around the globe. It includes resources such as syllabi, presentations, and assignments, how-to guides, and other online courses. And many of these resources can be imported directly into your LMS. And then, of course, the lab environment, which allows students to gain that hands-on experience using AWS. So all really there for your use. It is all free. So take advantage of these resources for you, your students, and for your institution. And then, of course, all of this is provided for educators and students, and mainly for students to help and develop in the area of job skills. So at AWS Educate, we're looking to see what the industry is asking for as far as qualification, and we're looking to fill the need for students and educators via what we call the cloud career pathways. So giving students the cloud skills they need to apply for those cloud-centric jobs in the future for many organizations. So really from all backgrounds, you don't have to be from a technology background or computer science student to leverage this content. We have business students leveraging it too, because we have, of course, business applications running in the cloud and need to know how those applications are being used. So all sorts of educational backgrounds can leverage this content. And so here's the time where I want to thank you for attending this Cloud 101 Introduction to Cloud Computing session. I'm happy to take any questions you have, and we'll be able to answer in the next few minutes some of the questions for all of you. I encourage you to look at the AWS Workshop from Home series to find this and other sessions that you can consume in your time. And I want to Okay, thanks everybody for attending this Cloud 101 session. My name again is Ryan Little, Technical Program Manager. I also have Melanie and Laura, who are also co-organizers with me. Quite a few of you had questions in regards to receiving a certificate after this session. So once this session is complete, you will be sent an auto-generated email which will outline the steps that you've done for completing this particular webinar, and you'll be given kind of like a certificate of completion in that, and links to that in the auto-generated email. So keep an eye out for that. You'll also be getting a survey at the end of this webinar as well. So if there's upcoming, I saw questions in the chat in regards to upcoming webinars, and actually speaks to our work from home series. So our workshops from home. So make sure that you attend any of those, and I'll have the website here that I can populate for you. Can get my laptop running. There we go. But I'll make sure that you'll get that link. It's AWS Workshops from Home. If you search for that, you'll be able to see. There are some questions in regards to what's the difference between cloud computing and how does it differ from edge computing. And actually, in point of fact, there's the aspects of cloud computing that actually edge computing is a part of, right? So edge computing encompasses that. So that's our points of presence, our POP locations, if you will. So that's where our CDN and DNS services live. We even have something called Lambda out on the edge. Lambda is our event-driven serverless compute. So all sorts of combinations that can be made there. Interesting question in the chat in regards to where does cloud actually come from? Actually, the concept goes back to the 1960s. Which was quite interesting, and they used a cloud symbol to denote flow charts and diagrams to symbolize the internet, and it's kind of evolved in the culture since then. So that was also quite an interesting question that we had. And I also had quite a few questions in regards to where you can learn more about machine learning from AWS Educate. So if you go to our public page as well, AWS Educate, and you log in, particularly as an educator, you'll be given access to the content. And there's a number of PowerPoint slides that are available. Similarly, you can also go to AWS.training, and there's links there for much free content that's available to you as AWS users or consumers of content. For many of those, we also give free certificates for learning as well. I'm looking here, other questions in regards to renewable energy. So when will it reach 100% by 2030, by 2040? So for AWS in renewable energy, we do take that very seriously. We've made a lot of progress on this commitment. Actually, AWS exceeded 50% renewable energy usage for 2018. And in addition to the renewable energy projects, AWS has announced 4 new wind farms and other new kind of solar farms that will be running. We have a few projects, 2 in Ireland, 1 in Sweden, and 2 in the US, with a total of 297 megawatt hours. 297 megawatts with expected generation of 830,000 megawatt hours. So huge growth in that area. And so we're on our goalpost for sustainability. And we stay tuned for updates in that regard. So I will invite Laura on the line as well. If you had any questions that maybe came up for you, or Melanie.
Hi everyone. Sorry, I've just been answering questions directly as well. So I was just there was quite a few around training courses that I've answered. So for anyone who asked directly, I've sent back some links as well. We have quite a lot of free training with some of the questions. Like one of them was around IoT, and I think you know, we've got I think it was over 20 different courses that are free in IoT, and we also have classroom training. Obviously, that's kind of on hold at the moment, but after that, we also have classroom training if that's more your thing. So there's a lot of free training though available. Just going through some of the questions. How IoT can be built in the cloud. We have a whole stack of IoT services. To the person who's asked, I'll put in the link to that. But we have many different services. We've got AWS Greengrass for compute at the edge. We also have we've got the IoT core that you can use. We've got IoT. Let me just send the link. So we have many different services. Actually, my area of speciality. So if you want to ask more questions on that, I'm happy to answer. But let me send the link to the person who asked, because we've got a whole suite. What other questions do we have? Just going through them now. Please send the link for the training. Is there a way to post the link for the training to everyone? I think I can send it to everyone. Let me do that, because there's a lot of questions around training.
Around training, yeah. So you should be able to see my screen. It should have the AWS Educate page on there. I would encourage all of you as students and educators to come to this page if you haven't done so, and to sign in with Educate. And if you do that, particularly as an educator, you'll get access to a whole slew of content that's available to you. And this is just for educators around the globe. So you'll see here, for example, Introduction to Cloud Computing has about 45 hours of content that's available to you. And this content you can integrate into your curriculum. And so we often talk about cloudifying your classroom, and so this is a great way to do that. We're even helping many institutions build out cloud degrees moving forward as well. So I would encourage all of you to explore that. There's also a professional development tab under AWS Educate, which if you go here, there's loads of information about certification. There's information here about cloud career pathways. So this is something that educators as well as students have access to. And we've defined this in 12 career paths or 12 cloud paths, if you will. And these cloud pathways match to the jobs that are out there. And that's really the kind of the form and function of Educate, is to help students get jobs. So whether if you're looking to become an application developer or a DevOps engineer or a machine learning scientist, there's about 25 to 50 hours of content depending in each of these pathways, which can help your students get a little bit closer, if you will, to those jobs. But you can also integrate a lot of the content in here for your courses as well. So that's AWS Educate in a nutshell. We also have the digital and classroom training. So this is outside of AWS Educate, but many of you asked for kind of continued learning. So this is where I would recommend all of you to go. If you search for
I've
digital,
just sent the link to everyone, I believe, to the free training courses. I just sent it to all.
Great. Yeah, so that there's no shortage of content that's out there for all of you. So I would encourage you to explore that as and when you can. Sorry, Laura, any other questions that you had?
I'm just having a look through. Yeah, you answered the one around sustainability that I was going to answer. I'm just. Someone asked actually around DevOps and what services. So I answered the question privately, but I'll post the link as well. I would, obviously it depends if you're looking for the DevOps Pro certification. We obviously have courses around that. For that, you'll obviously need to know sort of our core services in depth, but also our DevOps stack. So I would recommend really looking into CloudFormation for infrastructure as code. And we've got a whole suite of DevOps tools. I'll post that because I think that might be useful for people. So I'll post that link to everyone as well, because that was one of the questions. Let me have a look. What else? Let me see.
I'll just pull that page in just so people can see it. Yeah.
Yeah. because we have a whole range of tools. Do I get my going through the questions?
Okay, so
Did everyone get the links? Because there's quite a few questions are coming through now saying, can you share the links for free training courses? I sent it to all. Did everyone get that? I know obviously you can't reply, but hopefully that I'm getting a lot of yeses.
people
That's
people are
good.
getting yes. Yeah, so they're awake and responding. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, good,
So
good.
make sure you access those links, get the free training. There's loads of free training out there with AWS Educate, as well as kind of the larger AWS ecosystem as well. So make sure you stay connected. There will be a recording of this session that is brought onto the AWS page, the AWS workshop from homepage. So make sure that you go to that, and I'll see if I can load this here again. I had to try that one more time. So this page here can notify you and let you know of what sessions are coming up. And so there will be an on-demand or recorded version of this session in the coming days. So make sure you stay tuned for that.
Yeah. Oh, there's a good question actually. Someone's asked, can you do the AWS certification from home? So yes, a couple of weeks ago it was announced that Pearson VUE, which is one of the training providers or certification providers, I should say, now offer home. You can do your certification from home. So basically, you need to have obviously a computer with a webcam because someone does obviously check that you're doing it by yourself. But yeah, you can take all of our certifications now online at home.
Can I also say I've had a couple of questions around AWS accounts. If you are a student or an educator, if you join AWS Educate, you actually can access our credit capped environment, the starter account. You don't require, a credit card is not required to open that, and it gives you access to about 90% of AWS services. So that's a great solution for students who are wanting to start to build. If you were looking for access to the full suite of AWS services, then I would encourage you to open an AWS account, a normal one that will require a credit card, but then you have access to every service and every feature.
Awesome, awesome. Any other questions that you're seeing there?
There's some questions around promo codes. Is that specific to Educate? I'm just trying to. There's a couple there.
Yeah, Melanie, did you want to take that, the promo code?
Where is that question? Sorry.
It was just near the bottom. Just said, "What's a promo code?"
Oh, a promotional code is generally it's a code that you will receive and it gives you credits that you can then use on AWS services that you don't have to pay for. So you can say you get a promo code for $20 of credit. You then have $20 of credit to spend on AWS services, but you don't actually have to pay for those $20. So you can get those, for example, via AWS Educate. And they're very helpful because then it helps you to access AWS services for little to no cost.
Yeah, and so I'm hopefully you can see that on my screen here. So I'm just leveraging an AWS Educate educator account, and I have a starter account credit of $50. So these promotional credits come into play in helping you kind of get started with your starter account and using it to build and test and experiment on the platform through AWS Educate. But actually, the recommendation is to create a classroom yourself as an educator, and you can go ahead and do that. And invite students, or you can invite other educators to a classroom that you've created. And you can actually go in to the classroom environment and see how your students are using that platform, how they're building, whether they're failing or not. I talked about failing in the webinar, so that you can kind of go in and help them and troubleshoot as well. So this is a great way to stay connected with your students, and these credits are outside of the starter account credits that you're using. So that's why I always tell educators to leverage classrooms wherever possible.
Yeah, there's a question actually around AWS services and pandemics. I'm not sure if you're what the specific, but we've been doing a lot actually to support businesses, reacting to COVID-19. I'm actually going to post a link to everyone. There's some really good sort of use cases there, and just to show what we're doing. So it might be something that people are interested in. So I will post that now to everyone.
Awesome. Yeah, we have a short blurb on alternative forms of learning in these days and times as well on AWS Educate title page. And as Laura mentioned, there's another, our aws.amazon.com public page that also has loads of information dealing with COVID-19. Any other questions, comments? Wrapping up here the last few minutes. Again, thank you all for your time today. If you really enjoyed this session, let us know in the survey. Let us know what other sessions and webinars you're interested in learning about, and we're happy to accommodate you and build on your learning on top of AWS. Okay, question, just the last few questions there. Deadline for completing this course. There is no deadline, it's open. We believe in lifelong learning here at AWS, so whenever you're able to go to our workshop from homepage and consume this on-demand content as and when you can, it's available to you.
There was also a question earlier, and someone's just reminded me around like when we're going to be building new regions. So I'm going to send a link to our AWS infrastructure. There are new regions and availability zones coming soon this year, so I'll send that to everyone as well, so you can have a look. Let me get.
Awesome. There was also a question about the factors that shape region selection. So again, we don't have to worry too much about that for AWS Educate perspective. Educators and students will live in US East 1, which is Northern Virginia. But if you do have your own full production kind of AWS account, you do have a broad selection of region. And there's kind of like 4 main factors that shape region selection. The first is kind of the data sovereignty. So where can that data live? So considering things like GDPR for your data, considering PCI DSS and other kind of local laws and rules. So leveraging a region in that area. The second one is latency. So wherever your customers are at, you want to leverage a region or edge location that can help with that. The third is services. So not all regions have all services, but most regions have most services. All regions have most services because we're always updating the services that we have in our selection. So making sure that you have the service that you need in the given region. And then finally is cost. Different services have different costs by different regions. And there's a lot of reasons that go into that, mainly the infrastructure costs for AWS, but making sure that that speaks to you. So data sovereignty, we also said latency, services, and cost. Those are the 4 main factors. Okay, can cloud be called as web services, like commercial or non-commercial web services? So I would say cloud encompasses aspects of those. In regards to whether it's an enterprise, public sector, or startup, generally speaking, cloud can offer solutions in each one of those sectors. Okay, so Melanie, Laura, any other questions that you're seeing?
No, I think most of them have been answered.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you, everyone. If you do have continued questions, make sure you check out our aws.amazon.com page and stay connected for future learnings on top of AWS. And we thank you for your time today.